gunshot, knife wounds. He was definitely in the right town for his practice. On our left for 3 blocks, on our right for 2 blocks. This 5-block area was called Hop Town. 450 Chinese lived in this 5-block area. So now in any railroad town or mining town during the 1800s, Chinese were a big part of the labor force. This 5-block area then was run by the lady they called China Mary. Want to hire some Chinese labor? Well, that's who you went and talked to. Tell her what kind of jobs you had to do. She would select for you the Chinese to fill those positions. You would pay her for their labor. Then she'd turn around, charge the Chinese back, finding them employment 1/3 of their salary for the next 2 years. China Mary run this 5-block area right here on the right from her home. This is where she lived. She lived like on the first level, and then down below, like a basement or a cellar, is where she had the Chinese massage parlor and an opium den. Around the back of her house, you can still see some little rooms back there. They're original still. That's where she had the Chinese ladies of the night. Needless to say, China Mary was a very wealthy lady in Tombstone. Out of the right side of the trolley, this is famous worldwide because right here you are looking at the west side of the OK Corral. During the day, that's where they had the blacksmith shop. When you got the shoes put on your horses, got your animals fed, whatever the animals needs, that's what the OK Corral is all about. Underneath this awning, that's where the old stable barn used to be. In back of the OK Corral at that time was an open lot to Fremont Street. Each side of that open lot sat a building like this blue one on our right, and it was called Fly Photography. So now Mr. Fly didn't take pictures like this black and white one here hanging on the wall. And he did that as a hobby, working the mines to make a living. Well, his wife decided she could use some extra money. She went ahead and took this building they had here in the corner of 3rd and Fremont, had it made into an apartment, rented this out to Doc Holliday. This is where Doc Holliday was, and of course his wife's name, or his girlfriend, was Big Nose Kate. Didn't call her Big Nose Kate because she always had her nose in everybody else's business. On our left, another original building, second largest in Tombstone, the Shefflin Hall. Completed this structure 1881 for an opera house. It was the largest in the country, seating over 350 people at one time. Another original buildings on our left and on the corner, the San Jose House. Completed this structure 1879 as the first rooms for renting Tombstone. It's still being used for that purpose today. Out of the right side of the trolley, the Tombstone Epitaph newspaper. It was started by a fellow named John Clum in the year 1880. John got in Tombstone time to have a second newspaper, but he also became the mayor of Tombstone, ended up being one of Wyatt Earp's best friends. On our left, here in the corner of 5th and Ellen, out of all 110 bars in Tombstone, was the high-end one of them all called the Oriental. Finest furnishings in any bar in town, high-stake card games. It's also where Wyatt Earp dealt cards for a percentage of the gaming tables. So now Virgil Earp, he was the marshal at Tombstone. It was midnight. He was right here in front of the Crystal Palace. The storm went out really bad, monsoon going on. But that's when the McClantons of McClarty shot him down with shotguns right here. Didn't kill him. He lost the use of his left arm right there permanently. Again, on the right, halfway down the boardwalk, you'll see a sign with the Red Buffalo in the lower right-hand corner. Well, today that business is called the Red Buffalo. Back then, that was the Campbell and Hatch Saloon. That's where Morgan Earp was playing a game of pool. Through the back door, they shot him and killed him. That's where he ended up, dying on the pool table. Right here on the right, on 5th Street, was where your first marshal's office and jail was. Right here it sat in 1880. Fred White was the first marshal right there. Didn't last long as marshal, though. Shot and killed by a red sash cowboy high on opium named Curly Bill Broshaw. On the right, this is the original fire station they had during the 2 major fires of 81 and 82. It's all volunteer help for that fire department. Your brothers even volunteered for that. A lot of volunteer help still goes on in there today, too, because that is Tombstone Senior Center. 110 bars in Tombstone. Right here in the corner of 6th and Allen was the most popular one, called the Birdcage Theater. At the Birdcage, they had live music 24 hours a day, dance hall girls, ladies of the night, their own opera stage. They had a card game went on 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, never ending for over 8 years. Go through the museum, you'd still notice over 109 bullet holes throughout the ceiling and the wall. End up dying in Tombstone? A lot of folks sure seem to get that done. If that happened on our left, you would have been dragged or carried right here to this alley. Because down this alley is where A.J. Ritter's funeral parlor was. They kept A.J. so busy, opened up another shop on the west side of town. The street we're about to cross right now is the main street, Fremont Street. Fremont Street, 3 blocks north here, written up back then by New York Times, one of the heaviest red light districts in Western history. Housing was also hard to come by until they finally got a sawmill up in the Huachuca Mountains. Started cutting up boards, bringing them here to Tombstone, building homes like these on our left. Here's some of the old original ones still here. Built lots of that type of housing, and they called it shotgun housing. Remembering now, this was a heavy red light district, but still, on our right, second building in here with a metal roof. They went ahead and built this church anyway in 1880 as a Catholic church. It's still being used for that purpose today. Out of the right side of the trolley, in the distance, you'll see that mountain range. Those are called the Dragoon Mountains. So that is where Cochise, he was the Apache war chief, had all his women and children and braves lived in that mountain range, calling it home. The soldiers called it Cochise's stronghold, because they physically tried to kill or capture Cochise for years unsuccessfully. Finally, Cochise was forced to take his people and go to the reservation. There he died a natural death. You realize after all the battles he went through, he still lived to be in his 80s? Ever since we made a left turn here in Stafford, this is known where kind of the old Tombstone was, because this is where they first started selling lots, building homes, churches, so forth and so on, for the residents to live in. The church on our left is all original. It was the first non-Catholic church in all the Arizona territory. Reverend Peabody got here in 1882, had the Episcopal Church built, continued to do services here ever since. First lot sold in Tombstone in the year 1878. Here then you could have bought a lot for $7. Next block is where he lived. You could afford big homes like this. This was the elite part of Tombstone. The home on our left became known and popular as the haunted Beaufort house. A lot of haunted places in Tombstone. This is one of the most popular because this has been on the History Channel, Ghost Channel, so forth and so on. Check all these old homes built in the 1880s, still being lived in here by the residents of Tombstone. Coming up here on the right and on the corner today, you'll see it's a rock shop. Originally, this was the home of Morgan Earp and his wife when he was murdered at the Campbell and Hatch Saloon. He also lived here when he was the deputy for his brother Virgil. You might notice how much smaller his home was than his neighbor's, but personally, I've always thought he had the most convenient home of anybody in Tombstone. You see here now, right in his backyard, he had the Circle K and the Family Dollar. You look straight out of the fronting trolley now, you really get a good view of the Dragoon Mountains, where Cochise called home. One of the reasons they never could capture him is where he lived. Look at the view he had from up there. You can see the soldiers coming miles before they even got close to him. That gave him a big advantage to get a war party ready or do whatever he thought he needed to do to protect himself. Coming here into Boot Hill Cemetery. Folks started calling it Boot Hill. So many people were dying violent deaths with their boots on. Right out of the right side of the trolley, look through the fence here, you'll see the tallest white headstone. Belongs to Frank McClary. To the right of that is his brother Tom McClary. To the right of that is Bill Clanton. McClantons and McClarys were all part of the group that called themselves the Cowboys. They were the ones wearing the red sashes around their waists to prove they're in that organized crime group. It was one of the first organized crimes here and in the United States. They were cattle rustlers, horse thieves, smugglers, stagecoach robbers, even murder, and they got by with most of it. Wasn't much law to stop that big of a group. Those 3 headstones there belong also to the ones that the Earps and Doc Holliday killed at the OK Corral gunfight. A lot of headstones here, of course, but one in particular reads, "Here lies Lester Moore. 4 slugs from a 44, no less, no more." It was the year 1882, and they thought, well, maybe we should figure out just how many people have come to Tombstone and the area. So they did a census. The way they did that census was through the voters. Back in those days, in order to vote, you had to be a white male, 21 years or older, in order to do so. Well, that number came up to around 8,000. Now you figure between all the women, the children, the Chinese, all the other nationalities that lived here, illegal for them to vote. By the end of 1882, Tombstone was 12,000 people. That made this the largest city between St. Louis and San Francisco. Their population, 1,360 people. Coming up here a little bit, and on the right is where Virgil and his wife lived when he was the Marshal of Tombstone. Years ago, his original home burned down. So they went ahead and built a replica of his home right on the same spot his old one was, known today as Virgil's Corner. So right here on the right then is where Virgil Earp lived. Right there. On the left, Wyatt Earp's house. So there you have it. Morgan, Virgil, Wyatt, and Doc all living off of Main Street, Fremont Street. That's what the gunfight originally was called, the gunfight on Fremont Street, not the OK Corral gunfight. Newspaper in Hollywood called it that because it helped sales. Real gunfight happened right here on Fremont Street, behind the open lot at the OK Corral, right next door to Doc Holliday's apartment. So where the trolley is on Fremont Street, right at this spot is where the McClantons and McClarys were. Coming down 4th Street, making a left turn. Walking right at him, shoulder to shoulder, heavily armed, were the Earps and Doc Holliday. So it was right on that corner, October 26th, 1881, 1 o'clock in the afternoon. 3 were killed, 3 wounded, and over 30 some shots fired within about a 30-second period of time. As we know it, of course, today, the OK Corral gunfight. On the right and on the corner, today you'll see the business is called Old Time Can Photos. Back then, this was the Chinese restaurant in Tombstone. Folks called it the Can. Most everything they served come out of a can. One more thing on your right, you'll notice all these doors that are rolled. These were all lawyers' offices. There was over 40 some lawyers in Tombstone during the boom time. They'd earned themselves a reputation for being very dishonest. So the local folks called this part of town Rotten Row. Thanks for taking the tour today. Hope you all did enjoy it. My wages on this job are for tips. I got a spittoon here. If you'd like to put a tip in there, she's always appreciated.